What are the Carolina Panthers getting in their late round picks, Jaden Crumedy and Michael Barrett? I'll ask two people who cover them right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council, so you can get those questions into me right now. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So on Monday, we sat down with Jonathan Davis, the host of Locked On Longhorns, talk about Jatavion Sanders and Jonathan Brooks, two Longhorns, and see what they're going to bring to Carolina. Today, going to have not one, but two guests on to discuss what Jaden Crumedy, the defensive tackle out of Mississippi State, and Michael Barrett, the linebacker out of Michigan, are going to provide potentially here in Carolina this season and down the road. Stefan Krajisnik is the beat reporter for Mississippi State for the Clarion-Ledger in Jackson, Mississippi. Isaiah Hull is the host of Locked On Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, just like this show, and he will give me some perspective on Michael Barrett. So first off, let's start off the sixth-round pick 200 overall, Jaden Crumedy and Stefan Krajisnik here on Locked On Panthers right now. Back here on Locked On Panthers, and as promised, Stefan Krajisnik, he covers Mississippi State athletics for the Clarion-Ledger down in Jackson, Mississippi. Follow him on Twitter at skrajisnik3. To spell that, SKRAJISNIK3. That's for all the podcast listeners. The people here on YouTube, of course, can see his name right there. Stefan, thank you, man, for joining the show. As we're going to get into some Jaden Crumedy, the Mississippi State defensive tackle, was selected 200 overall in the sixth round by Carolina. But appreciate you taking some time to join the show today, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun getting to dive into these things as the college players make their transition, and it's fun watching people around the Panthers get to learn about someone who we've been watching here in Starkville for the last few years. It's always a fun time of the year.
Yeah, and this is somebody in Jaden Crumedy who I did not know existed until the day he was drafted by the Carolina Panthers a couple of weeks ago. And he has an interesting story. So apparently, from what I've read, his mom was pulled over by a cop one day, and the cop saw Jaden in the back seat, saw how big he was. He was a fifth grader. The cop thought he was a high schooler and wanted him to come out and play football. So he told his mom, all right, I'll make a deal with you. If you sign up for football, then I won't give you a ticket. Have you tracked down this cop, and is this actually true?
I haven't. It's kind of surprising that was really the first time I'd heard that story. He never really shared it, at least not with us reporters, around Mississippi State, or at least since I've been here the last few years. But when I saw that, I was like, that's fascinating, and it's really cool. I guess it's not too surprising because he's the guy that from a young age, and especially in high school, quickly emerged as pretty talented guy in the high school level. And you could see, why Mississippi State, a school that's, churned out some pretty good defensive linemen the last few years or so, wanted him. Right. So it's not surprising. I believe him. I mean, he's never not lied to me in the past, as far as I know. So I'm sure he wouldn't be doing that, after he's getting drafted. So he's a good dude. He's a funny guy. And it's cool to see, that story kind of surfaced because it is fascinating. It does, make a lot of sense when you get to know him and his journey a bit.
That's honestly a hilarious story. I know here in Charlotte, we have the Police Athletic League. So this is not a rare thing where police officers will try to get young men playing football at an early age. But I don't think I've ever heard a story like that where no ticket as long as your son plays football. And this cop should be his agent, and was probably should have been the lead recruiter for Mississippi State with getting Jaden Crumedy to start playing football. So the dream has been realized for the police officer and for Jaden Crumedy and his family. Last year, he started all 12 games for Mississippi State, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks on a team that was up and down with Zach Arnett taking over after the tragic loss of Mike Leach last offseason. I'm just curious overall, looking at Jaden Crumedy last season, just his career down in Starkville, what are the Panthers getting in Jaden Crumedy as a player heading into the NFL?
Yeah, I think he's a talented guy with a ton of potential. I think a lot of teams will probably say that about guys they draft, but I think that's the case with Jaden because, it goes back to fifth grade, but the size and the athleticism has been, evident for so long with him. And there just felt like there was an untapped potential in his time at State. I think he probably would have gone a bit higher in the draft had he gone last year. But, he had the 2022 football season. Coming into it, he was one of those guys that a lot of us, covering Mississippi State were thinking like, all right, like he's about to make that jump. And then he ends up having to miss the first 7 or 8 games of the season because of a hand injury or an arm injury, something along those lines. And we don't see him until, the latter part of the season. And when he returned, the defense took a step forward. His numbers, aren't that impressive. He had some tackles for loss, but when you look at the numbers from the 2022 season, even, with the understanding that it wasn't a lot of playing time, I think it was only 5 games. It doesn't really stand out, but when you watched him play and you watched the way defenses had to focus on him, and I talked as successful as Mississippi State's been, the last decade or so with defensive linemen, guys like Chris Jones, Jeffrey Simmons, Fletcher Cox, that have come out of Mississippi State. That really hasn't been the case the last, 3 or 4 years. And so Crumedy was playing along a line that wasn't too talented, or at least not by Mississippi State standards. And, teams in the SEC were, even after he came back, we're looking at him right away being like, all right, we can, put some extra attention on this guy because there's some open spots, on the rest of the line that they don't got to worry as much about, in that Zach Arnett 3-3-5 that he ran when he was the defensive coordinator for Leach. But with the attention that he garnered, you could see that he's pretty legit. He's got some talent. I think, and if you go back and watch the 2022 Egg Bowl, it was the last game that Mike Leach coached, and Mississippi State went to Ole Miss, and it was kind of a rainy and gross day, but they still held that Ole Miss offense to 22 points, and that's pretty impressive against Lane Kiffin and what he's been able to do, his time with the Rebels, right? So you watch that game, and the numbers don't pop off the page, but you watch and you're like, man, they're putting a lot of attention over on Jaden Crumedy. Like they knew that he was a guy that could really change that game, and he ended up making a pretty big impact, even if the numbers maybe don't reflect it as much. So I think had he had a full sample size that season, I think if he had gone to the draft, he probably would have been a better option. But he was injured, the sample size wasn't great, the numbers didn't pop. He decided to come back for one more year, and I think it was another situation where State just didn't really have a ton of production on the defensive line this year. And I think teams could focus on him a bit more. So there felt like there was that potential that just, there wasn't enough around him to maybe tap into that as much as State would have hoped.
Yeah, you can talk about the injuries that you brought up there, 2022. You also look at the coaching staff. He came in with Joe Moorhead, who then was fired. Mike Leach comes in last year, unfortunate passing Mike Leach. Zach Arnett, who was the defensive coordinator, he takes over as the head coach. And a kind of tumultuous season this past fall. He's no longer the head coach down there in Starkville. And you say untapped potential. He's going to be 24 years old come training camp here in Carolina. And that's an old prospect. The second year in a row, Carolina has gotten somebody right there in their mid-20s. Last year was DJ Johnson out of Oregon. Now it's Jaden Crumedy out of Mississippi State. I'm curious, do you think as an older prospect who does have that untapped potential that he could have the maturity to come into the NFL and potentially contribute immediately, especially having come from the SEC and face all those kind of double teams and the attention that he faced in that 3-3-5 system that Zach Arnett ran the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that, just because, he's a guy that you talk about everything that, some of these players have gone through the last 4 or 5 years at Mississippi State. Well, he was kind of a leader through it all, right? He represented the team at media days last year. He was a guy that they turned to a lot as a veteran. When it's a program where that locker room is so – the locker room is dealing with so many emotions, right? I mean, you have a coach fired, you lose a coach tragically, you have, a 5-7 season and the coach is getting fired midway through a year. That's a lot that those players had to deal with. And he was a guy that they leaned on. So in terms of maturity, I think he's probably a guy that's excited to kind of get into an opportunity, kind of get a fresh start and be able to learn from some guys as opposed to having to be, the guy in the room, the veteran in the room. And, the thing with the age that, that's concerning, right? I mean, it's a lot different when a guy is 21, you're saying untapped potential versus, 24, 25, some of these prospects. And I think that's what I'm really interested to see these next few years in the NFL. If you're starting to get kind of this, whatever the term is, you got these players that have benefited from these extra COVID years, right? So you're getting fifth, sixth year guys that are older. I mean, you look at a guy like Michael Penix, who the Falcons drafted, like he's got potential, but he's already up there in age. How much potential? Like it's something that we're about to learn. Like, how are these players that are playing, 5-6 years and played maybe a year or two longer than usual going to look when they come to the NFL, and can they be mature and learn quicker and get into that, untapped potential sooner than maybe some of the other prospects that are getting drafted alongside them. It's probably make for a great case study in like 5-6 years to see how, some of those players turned out, but he's, he falls into that category of kind of wait and see how risky it is for teams to take some of those older guys.
Yeah, when you say that, I kind of wonder, you bring up the injury in 22, and maybe had he been healthy, he would have came out last year, been a higher draft pick. And the production, it doesn't jump off the page, but older player, maybe the Panthers thought, we can get this guy in the 6th round, he can come in, contribute, and maybe that's only one contract kind of player. And if he would have been younger, it's possible that he's a day 2 pick, possibly on Friday night, just thinking about kind of the things you said there. And just, the thought process of a lot of these guys using the COVID year and sticking around for a while. Michael Penix Jr., who's a Falcon, he's a guy who dealt with a ton of injuries back at Indiana before bouncing back at Washington and doing what he did this past year. And hell, he might not be 20, he'll be like 27 by the time it seems like he starts there in Atlanta. So that's a Falcons problem. But I'm very excited to see what Jaden Crumedy can do here in Carolina. A great story to have the pullover, and then to now his mom be pulled over by a cop, and for him now to be in the NFL, I guess 12 years later, I suppose. Yeah, 5th grader, I guess you're 12, 10. I don't even know how old you are at that point in time. It's been a long time. But Stefan, I really appreciate you stopping by today. Check out his work again at the Clarion-Ledger, covering all things Mississippi State athletics. And of course, subscribe to that paper. You can check out all things going off Ole Miss and everything in the state of Mississippi. Follow him on Twitter at Krajisnik3. I'll spell it out again for the Twitter folks out there, SKRAJISNIK3. Does a great job covering Mississippi State Bulldogs down there in Stark Vegas. Stefan, again, thank you so much for joining the show, man.
Yeah, 10 minutes in and you're still pronouncing my name right. So that's all that matters, right? I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Hey, look, I was practicing it, hoping I would get it right. And when I asked you before we came up here, I wasn't that far off with how to pronounce it and also the nationality. I thought it was going to be Croatian. You said Serbian. We're right there in that same area of Europe, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Let's take a quick pause here on the show. And on this other side, we'll be joined by Locked On Wolverines host Isaiah Hole to discuss what the Panthers are getting in their 7th round pick, Michael Barrett, here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. And well, how about those Carolina Hurricanes pushing it to a Game 6 in Raleigh and possibly a Game 7 at Madison Square Garden to Mecca against the New York Rangers? Congrats to all the fans out there of the Carolina Hurricanes. Right now, new customers, that could be you, get $150 in bonus bets of any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Panthers, as promised, Isaiah Hole, the host of the Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Check it out on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, just like you check out Locked On Panthers on YouTube and wherever you check out your favorite podcast. And follow him on Twitter, simply at Isaiah Hole, for all things Michigan Wolverines. Isaiah, how you doing, man?
Oh, we're in the heat of the offseason here. That's the draft is done. Right now, it's kind of like what recruits are putting out top 5 lists. That's the excitement of May when you're covering college football. So it's a little bland, but good.
Yeah, I always wonder, especially for a school like Michigan, what you guys talk about on the college channels in May. When I had the Locked On Gamecocks guy on, it was pretty easy. They can talk, of course, about the transfer portal, but also they're in the SEC, and college baseball is pretty big down here in the Southeast. So for you guys, I'm praying for you. I know we're almost there to off-season mode, and the season will finally be here in due time. But let's get into Michael Barrett, who's had some pretty good months recently. Won a national championship at Michigan, got drafted in the 7th round, 240th overall by the Carolina Panthers. An awesome opportunity for him coming to Carolina, even as a 7th round pick. Quite simply, what are the Panthers getting in Michael Barrett?
Well, he's a guy that's got some speed, that right? Like that's what kind of allowed him to. The athleticism is what kind of allowed him to be on the field for Michigan. He was kind of had a slow burn in Ann Arbor because I'm sure you've probably noted that he was a Wolverine for quite some time. I mean, we're talking class of 2018. So he was. It's funny. I think back to like when was the first time I took a picture of Michael Barrett? And then like it was Notre Dame at the 2018 game.
My God.
Season opener. It was forever ago. And I think about some of the, like that was Shea Patterson's first game as a Wolverine. Like that was forever ago. So he's been around for a while, and he was kind of being groomed to be the Viper, which was a hybrid linebacker safety position, kind of more safety than linebacker. But it wasn't until 2011, Mike McDonald, the current coach of the Seattle Seahawks, he was the defensive coordinator for Michigan at the time. After the Michigan State game, which is the last regular season game that Michigan had lost, one of the issues that the defense had is that it was really struggling to keep up with tempo, because they wanted to make substitutions based off of kind of formation and different things they were seeing. And because of that, Michigan State was going fast and not allowing Michigan to get set. And because of that, the next week he said, all right, I have the fix to this. No one's going to get us on this again. We're going to put Michael Barrett out there. He had a year of starting experience as the Viper the previous year in 2020. And it still kind of took a little bit of time for him to kind of work himself in, right? He was a guy who was a reserve for a little while. And then it was more at the end of the 2022 season, from kind of the Rutgers game on. He had 2 interceptions in that game, one being a pick 6. And then against Ohio State, he had a monster game. That's when he kind of solidified himself. It went from being like, this is a guy who's kind of a role player. This is a guy that, you're really not counting on that much, but, maybe you can count on him here and there, to being a guy that's like, okay, I don't ever want to see him not on the field. And that was kind of the moment, that Rutgers game forward was when things kind of started to change for him. And I mean, he's got the athleticism. He's got a good nose for the football. He's a tough guy too. Like he got hurt in the middle of this past season. And you look back at the Maryland game, the penultimate regular season game of the year, he got hurt. He came out briefly and then was like, you know what? I don't care how hurt I am. You can't keep me away from this game. I need to be in there. And this was a game where the defense was up against had their back up against the wall. And that actually speaks a lot to his leadership, right? And I was walking from sideline to sideline, and as I'm walking past the Michigan bench, I can hear Mike Barrett sitting there, like kind of like screaming, not in like a negative way, but like telling his teammates, like, we need to pick things up, right? Like, this is not the Michigan defense. We need to be better than this. Like, we need to go out there and we need to make plays. We need to be able to do things to get off the field and give the offense a chance to extend this lead. We don't want to, put our offense in a bad spot. So we need to buckle down. And so team captain, leader, athletic, got a nose for the football. He's kind of a complete player, and he has a pretty good feeling for what the offensive side of the ball is doing, because in high school, that's where he was. He was a former quarterback. So he's got a really good knowledge of the game as well. So he's a really dynamic player. He's a really interesting prospect, and I'm excited to see what he's able to do at the pro level.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everything you just said there about Michael Barrett, his athleticism, his leadership, that doesn't speak to me as a 7th round draft pick. Because once you get to that part of the draft, you're wondering if this guy is even going to make the roster. And I've read some evaluations, and one of them I want to read to you and get your perspective on that. But what I'm hearing from you is this might be a guy who can come in and actually be a contributor for this team. And I'm curious. Michigan, obviously one of the Tiffany programs in college football, have a big-time legacy. You just won a national championship. Jim Harbaugh, we know what his legacy is going to be there in Ann Arbor for the end of time, as long as, I guess, nothing crazy comes out after the NCAA stuff that seems to be ongoing up there in Ann Arbor. Charles Woodson, you know what he's always going to mean up there. Desmond Howard as well. Michael Barrett's the all-time winningest player at the University of Michigan. I sure would hope so, if you've been there since 2018, that you'd be the all-time winningest player.
He's older than me. He's 45 years old.
Oh, my God. So, like, what legacy is he leaving behind up there in Michigan after his 6 years there and leaving of a national championship and now departing and being a 7th round pick?
Well, the legacy is one that was kind of a continuation of what we saw some of the players that helped turn things around after 2020. You look at Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Ross. Obviously, Josh Ross doesn't have the pro career that Aiden Hutchinson does with the Detroit Lions, but they were the ones who kind of said enough is enough, right? We cannot be this doormat. We're Michigan, like you said, a Tiffany program. We've got to be able to live up to the name. We need to beat Ohio State. We need to do things of that nature. And he, along with a couple other players, kind of carried that torch. He was one of the defensive captains this past year, like I said, a team captain. But he also had a bravado about him, which was there's some things about him that I feel made him a little bit more of the heart of a team than maybe people might realize. One of the sayings that he coined, actually, I think Jim Harbaugh technically coined it, but he repeated it. He was the first person to say it. And it became something that became really that really resonated with fans up here. He said that we're in the ass kicking business and business is booming. He had that. I saw another quote from him this morning that I just kind of that I just barely remembered. He said, "Be careful who you make the villain." Like it's just so many things that he had the sound bites, he had the swag, but he was also a guy that kind of galvanized that group, right? Like between him and Mikey Sainer still, they were the veteran presence that said like, okay, yeah, we lost some players coming out of last year. We lost Amazi Smith and people don't believe in us, right? They thought that it was a fluke year one. They thought it was a fluke year two. They think that all of this is due to Connor Stallions in year three. And yet you have a player like him able to go out and have a big game against the Alabamas and the Washingtons of the world, right? Like it's no surprise when you look at the collective of the Michigan defense that the toughest passing offense that they faced all year long, which was was Washington Huskies, right? They're the number one offense in the country, and they hold them to 13 points, right? And you look at who the ringleaders are for the team, and it's Mikey Sainer still, Mike Barrett. Those are the guys on the defensive side of the ball that are the ringleaders. And so I think his legacy is one that is a continuation of what you kind of started to see 2 years ago, except for he is kind of part of more of the fulfillment of what they were trying to do, and by being able to bring home a Rose Bowl win and a national championship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he deserves a statue in Ann Arbor, but clearly he's going to be a guy that's always remembered for being able to turn around a program under Jim Harbaugh, where not too long ago, a lot of Michigan fans, I don't know where you stood there, wanted to see Harbaugh gone. Now Harbaugh is gone, but he's gone having won a national championship and gone to the playoff 3 years in a row, and has folks down there in Columbus really concerned about Ryan Day and whether he should be their head coach moving forward since they can't beat Michigan. But a couple more things here on Michael Barrett before I let you go here on the show, Isaiah. He's a smaller guy, listed at 5'11", 233. I looked at Pro Football Focus, just their evaluation on him, because quite honestly, Michigan football, I watched a lot of it once you get to the end of November against Ohio State into the playoff. But before then, they're so good. They're in the ass-kicking business, as Michael Barrett said. There's not much to watch when it comes to Michigan and really Ohio State. And that's a testament to the programs and how strong they are, and also what the Big Ten was before adding Washington and Oregon come July 1, and USC and UCLA as well. But looking at him, PFF said that he's better as a natural football player, but he's too small to play linebacker, not athletic enough to play safety. He projects as a potential special teams ace with some defensive responsibilities in dime situations. How do you see Michael Barrett transitioning to the NFL and his chances potentially to make a 53, and whether he can be more than just a special teams type of player for Carolina or for anyone down the road?
Well, I would probably disagree with that he's not athletic enough to play safety. I think he absolutely is. He was a safety, right? Like when he came in, they brought him in as an offensive weapon, as a mobile quarterback, and said, like, you know what, defensively, we feel like you can play safety. He didn't change to linebacker because it was like, hey, you can't play this position. It was more, we need someone that is as athletic as you that can play that linebacker position. It just so happened that they had that hybrid linebacker position that was more of a safety, that was more popularized by Jabril Peppers during his time at Michigan. So he does have that capability. Now, do I think that he'll necessarily be able to assert himself defensively immediately in the NFL? No, I think it's probably going to take him a little bit of time. But the good thing for Barrett is that he's overcome those odds before, because he was primarily a special teams guru, really. Like, I think back to like 2019, he was nowhere. This is his second year. He's probably going to take over for Khaleke Hudson at Viper eventually. But you don't know for sure if he's going to be able to do that or not. And where did he make his name? He was a guy that was coming off the edge on special teams plays and blocking punts. It just seemed like it was something that he had a knack for. Again, the knack for getting to the football. He has that ability to play a little bit bigger than his size. And, I know he's a little bit smaller as far as height, but I mean, he's still got a decent size. He's a pretty muscular guy. He's just a little bit more of a compact build, but he certainly can make plays on the ball. You can do, Michigan asked him to do a lot at that linebacker position because when Mike McDonald came and installed that new system that was continued by Jesse Minter, it was kind of one of these, like, everyone covers, right? It doesn't matter if you're a defensive end, you're a defensive tackle, you're a linebacker, you're going to be asked to drop back in coverage here and there. And that's why you started seeing him have success at the pass breakups, why you saw him have a couple interceptions in one game. And that was pivotal, too, in that moment. Michigan was behind Rutgers in 2022. I remember being on the sidelines and hearing some of the Rutgers photographers say, oh, I think we maybe found our quarterback. They're going to win this thing. Michigan ended up winning 45-13 or something like that in the end. But because Michael Barrett had 2 straight possessions in which he picked the ball off. So he does have that athleticism, that ability to kind of read what's going on across from him and make someone pay. Sometimes I think you look at the smaller size and you think, okay, that's not going to work, but he might not be that big bruising, that type of, what you call it, like a Ray Lewis type of linebacker.
Yeah.
But he's a guy that, especially like you mentioned, the dime packages and stuff like that, you can put him out there in a nickel type, I think, in the NFL, and it would make sense. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense at Michigan because in the college you might want to get someone that's even a little bit smaller, that's where they played Mikey Sainer still. But in the NFL, you can look at a guy like Barrett and say, all right, we can put you out there on and cover a receiver, and you're probably going to be all right doing it. We've seen him run receivers down. He's got speed. He's got that ability. He's got the ability to cover.
Yeah, and the thing too, being a 7th-round pick, special teams is probably his best way on the roster, but also from listening to you, he's better playing close to the line of scrimmage. You can be able to cover guys at a backer position, and plenty of backers in the NFL struggle with that. So he could be somebody used in nickel situations, and excited to see what he can bring to the table here in Carolina. And one note for Panther fans out there, Barrett, 5'11", 233, the best linebacker in franchise history, and a Hall of Famer. Sam Mills is 5'9", 229. Not saying that Michael Barrett's going to be a Hall of Famer, be Sam Mills, because no one's had a bigger influence in Carolina.
You go ahead and say it. You can say it. Erect the statue right now for Mike B.
Well, I just let people know that it's been done before. It's possible, but I think the Panthers got to pick up based on what you've had to say here on the show today, Isaiah. But check him out on Locked On Wolverines. His name is Isaiah Hull. Follow him on Twitter at Isaiah Hull. As there's a big time transition going up there in Ann Arbor, and we'll see how the Michigan Wolverines look in this new look Big Ten heading into the 2024 season. We'll take a quick pause. We'll come back right here and wrap up the show here on Locked On Panthers. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes guesswork out of buying NFL tickets, and we'll no longer have to guess when the Panthers will play in Germany or who they will play there and all the other games they have on, as the NFL is finally going to give us the schedule this morning and later on tonight, where we'll find out the other 16 games Carolina Panthers are scheduled to play in 2024. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again to Stefan Krajisnik, the Mississippi State beat reporter for the Clarion-Ledger, and Locked On Wolverines host Isaiah Hull for their perspective on Jaden Crumedy and Michael Barrett, respectively. Really, really good insight from the two of those guys, and hoping to be able to get beat reporters who have covered Washington State and Kentucky, because I think right now we got Locked On Gamecocks covered with Xavier Legette, and we had Andrew Lyon on. We have talked to Jonathan Davis, 2 birds, 1 stone, talked about Tavion Sanders and Jonathan Brooks. Now we have talked about the 6th and 7th round picks. There's only 1 pick remaining, or 2. We got Charles Smith Wade from Washington State, which actually I do have an interview that should be lined up later this week, and probably going to get that to y'all next week. The schedule coming out, mailbags, be other things to talk about, but I will get you some perspective on what Chau Smith-Wade's can bring to Carolina in the next week or so. Then still trying to nail down somebody from Kentucky. Was hoping to potentially still have, maybe not, Lance Daw of Locked On Wildcats or Locked On Kentucky, I guess. Have not heard from him. So hopefully I'll hear from him. If not, I'll have to hit up somebody up there in the Bluegrass State, and they can tell me what the Panthers getting in Trevin Wallace really next year in 2025, as he is, in my opinion, the successor to Shaq Thompson, who's likely playing his last season as a Carolina Panther. So all that coming up at some point on the show. But later on this evening, on Wednesday, if you're watching on Wednesday, Tuesday nights, that's typically when I put out shows on YouTube, but on Wednesday morning, you'll get the podcast version. But later on Wednesday, over on YouTube, I will go live and discuss Carolina Panthers schedule and my thoughts on it. Not going to talk about if it's a tough schedule or not. That's kind of stupid. A lot of every NFL team has so much roster turnover. You don't really know. We can look at certain points in time, like last year, where they had for their first 6 games on the road. And yeah, that is a difficult stretch. And we saw it was because they went 0-6. Now, could they have won some of those games? Possibly, but we'll go over the schedule, talk about Munich and all that coming up. So hopefully it's going to be at the right date for your boy, and all that will happen on YouTube. So I'll be live at some point in time. Got to do another live show before that. I have a commitment to, so I will get to the podcast at some point late on Wednesday. Not late, probably like 9 o'clock on Wednesday night once schedule is out. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday, I'll be back again to answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or you can DM me at Julian Council to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all later tonight on Wednesday, but also on Thursday if you listen to the pod.